The New King James says, "Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together unto him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as from us as though the day of Christ had come." I like the translation, "is here." Verse 3 says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day is not here, unless the falling away come first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." All right, I almost closed the end of the stream instead of shutting the window down. That would have been terrible. So what we're looking at in particular is in verse 3 with the word that's translated "falling away" in the King James and translated "departure" in the Old English versions. It's translated "apostasy" and things of that nature in some of the modern versions. So can you give us a brief overview of the controversy that we're looking at here with the translation of the Greek word apostasia?
Yeah, when you look at this word apostasia, historically speaking, there has been, let me say it this way. You have the Greek word apostasia. So from that, the reason some of the controversy has taken place is because as we're doing right now, we're reading it in English. And so if you go back to some of the early English translations, we could probably skip Wycliffe, because Wycliffe was translated from the Latin. But if you go to Tyndale and for the rest, they're going straight from the Greek. And so what you have there in those early English translations, you have them translating the word apostasy as departure. They didn't say what kind of departure it was. It just simply said departure. And so the King James comes along in 1611, and it says falling away. So and then of course later, as you mentioned, in the modern things, you might have apostasy, you might have rebellion in the ESV, others. So the question comes back is, what does this word mean? It could mean pretty much. It really only means two things. One, it means it could mean three, hypothetically. It could either mean a spiritual revolt, a political revolt, or in what has become later, I would say, you could probably tell me better than me, Lee, when the earliest departure, like as in the rapture. The third one is people saying that this word apostasy could mean physical departure, as in the rapture. 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. I don't remember.
The first time that doctrine was first taught, that anyone's found in extant literature, was in 1895. But it really didn't get popular at all, any traction, until the 40s and 50s, 60s, with men like John R. Rice and some of the brothers at Dallas Theological Seminary.
So that's what you have here. Is you have, and I think we could just end it right here, because if just like Darby created, the pre-trib, some guy in the 1890s created this out of nowhere, so we could just dump it and throw it away because it's not historical, right? Isn't that how we do hermeneutics?
Yeah.
Not at all. So that's what you have here. The controversy surrounds: does it mean spiritual apostasy, spiritual rebellion, political rebellion, or does it mean the physical rapture? And so what you see in the conversations is, you see arguments based on linguistics, going to Little and Scott lexicon. You see them based on the English translations. You see them based on context. You see the arguments based on definite articles in comparison with other portions of Scripture. And so there's a variety of ways that people have tried to argue their position. And so that's kind of the summary of where we're at. And I think it's a very important topic. It's super important in some of the work that I'm doing for different reasons, but it is a very important topic.
So you mentioned the article, and I find this a very fascinating subject. Andy Woods did a book where he really, even though I'm on the other side of the controversy with him, he raised a very important question, and he pointed out the definite article. Why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, this to me, when I first read his article, he wrote an article for the Prophecy Watcher magazine back in 2017, and I came to Prophecy Watchers in 21. And so as I was interacting with the article in a fresh way upon my arrival there, that's when I reached out to you. And what his point there, which I think is very well made, it actually convinced me. I think his point is compelling. I'll say it that way. His point is that when you look at 2 Thessalonians 2:3, it says that the day he doesn't talk about the translation of anastaken, the day coming or the day present. I agree with you that the best is the day is not present. That word appears in other places in Galatians and Romans. It's translated as present, things to come, etc. So the idea is that day cannot be present unless definite article, the apostasia, and the apostasy comes first, and another definite article, the man of sin is revealed. So Andy's argument on that was, hey, look, this is talking, whenever you have a definite article, this is talking about something very specific. The definite article appears three words over as it relates to the man of sin, the man of lawlessness being revealed. And that event, so he says, look, that event of the man of lawlessness being revealed is a singular instantaneous event. It's not a long drawn out event. It's a singular event at a moment in time. He says, therefore, the definite article on apostasy is guiding the conversation as well in the same way. So as the man of sin is his revealing is a single event, using that verb, the coming first of the apostasy also is a singular event and not some long drawn out apostasy that could happen over generations or even centuries. Because one of the things that he describes is, how would you even know whether an apostasy event would occur? Because this will be my language summarizing it, is the Christendom doesn't follow the Pope. We have our own levels of authority. So how would we know apostasy appeared? Would it be just one guy saying that, or is it a general thing? And what he makes out is that even in the Bible, in Acts chapter 20, Paul says the wolves will be coming. We look at the church of not even Laodicea, but we see the church of Ephesus already falling away from their first love early in the 90s, mid 90s of the book of Revelation. So if you continue on, you see the Gnostic heresies. Obviously, you can go into the Catholic Church. You can call that some of their apostate doctrine if you wanted to. Coming all the way into the modern age, beginning in the 1850s, you see Harvard and Yale, these other divinity schools that were originally meant to preach the gospel and to train pastors to preach gospel. They've gone left, they've gone liberal. In our modern age, there's no doubt, you look at the national denominations have gone. So what he's saying is it's nebulous. There isn't a one singular event that has been the apostasy. Therefore, the idea that it is a spiritual apostasy or spiritual rebellion cannot be the proper translation. So then for him, he says, because of the definite article, we have to remove that as a consideration. The only option then is that it means the physical departure of the rapture, a singular event at a moment in time.
Yeah, and I like the concept that it's a definite event, and it's either a definite moment or a short period of definite time. It can't be generic. I really appreciate that observation. Really, it clears the table from about 50 options and brings it right down to just a few.
Yeah, to me, I remember at the time, reading that, going, wow, this is persuasive. And so then I reached out to you, and you were like, well, hey, I'm working on a book on this. And I said, hey, well, why don't you write an article in response to this? And then you provided a whole bunch of data answering, because Andy had 5 or 6, 7 or 8, whatever, different lines of reasoning, and you answered them all again in your book, Apostasia. And so when you came back and shared your data, I was like, well, again, we all agreed in the sense that the definite article is very important. So Andy said, well, if it's not this, it has to be the rapture and the physical departure. And you said, well, wait a minute. The data doesn't support your second option. And so that persuaded me, well, if it's not then the apostasy of the church, and it's not based on your data, it's not the rapture, the physical departure, then what else is it? And that's what I in some of the work I'm doing, talking about a singular moment of time in the apostasy of the Jews. But we don't need to talk about that. But simply to say that the this is where, even in my mind, all of us have to be open-minded. I was like, well, Andy makes a great argument that I'm leaning towards this being the case because he makes a great, compelling argument about it. It can't be the apostasy of the church. And so then you come along, you send me in a tailspin with the data, and I'm like, well, then it can't be that. So then what is another solution? So I think we always have to be open-minded to refine our views based on the data. And again, the data that you worked on in that book was relatively unexplored. Certainly, it's not that it was not out there, but in the sense that you brought it all together in a fresh new way, brought it into one new book, and you brought it all seamlessly together, which to me, that's what we're here for, is to do the research and to study and to submit to the data.
Yeah, to me, this is a tremendous opportunity for believers when they go into this subject to exercise our obligation to really sincerely gather all the evidence that's available and weigh all the evidence available, read both sides, weigh the arguments on both sides, and let the truth go where it wants to go.
Yeah, that is so well said. I think what we see today, too often in the Christian world, even the eschatology world, is that, people will write books, people will write papers, people will, talk about it on YouTube, they'll get presentations, and then some data will come available that it was unavailable. It just simply was unavailable or unexplored before. And then we go, hey, I'm going to need to refine my view. God forbid I would change my view. But sometimes people they dig in their heels a little bit, and they don't. They're again, it just comes down in my mind to humility, because none of us has all the answers, for sure. And we always keep things with an open hand. I mean, we can lean strongly in a direction, but when new data comes to play, I mean, if we discover it, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls provided a great example of new data that helped us understand the Second Temple period, the first century, even understanding what Jewish life was like. We had Josephus, but nothing like what we saw there. So when new data becomes available that has been unexplored, we need to be open to it.
Absolutely. Now, when we're looking at this distinction, is this a spiritual departure or a physical departure? Obviously, if we're going to look at a Jewish apostasy or a Jewish spiritual departure in the tribulation, then we're obviously going to end up on the spiritual departure side. Mm-hmm. Just briefly give us a couple minutes of why you were inclined to feel like we have to look on that side of the spectrum, on the spiritual departure side rather than a physical departure side.
Yeah, it's obviously not a political revolt. The Greek certainly can mean that. So again, if it's Andy made an argument, there's no way to define or to demonstrate the spiritual rebellion of the church because it's so widespread, and so that again that caused me to go. Then does it ever mean physical departure? And then you showed that that's not until the 5th, 6th century AD, and I thought, well, man. So as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, I wonder then. I started thinking about what the other key word here is, the word proton. Okay, yep. The word proton here is the word for first, and what it's saying, and in addition to that, is the interpretation, the proper interpretation, that the day of the Lord, some verses will say has not come, but again, haven't say the day of the Lord is not present. It's not here. Paul's saying, look, Thessalonians, don't freak out, the literal Greek. Don't be scared out of your mind. Don't be scared out of your wits. Just relax, calm down. I know you've heard some rumors that you're in the tribulation period. In fact, you're not in the tribulation period. The day of the Lord is not present. The day of the Lord is not here, because I've already taught you this in chapter 2, verse 5. He says, I taught you these things earlier, that the first event of the day of the Lord is the apostasy and the man of sin being revealed. So that being the case, I started thinking, well, that's interesting, because in Daniel 9:27, if we were to compare, everybody, if you were to ask anybody what starts the tribulation period, or at least the 70th week of Daniel, most every Bible teacher is going to say Daniel 9:27. They're not necessarily going to say 2 Thessalonians 2:3, because I think what has happened is they have interpreted it to mean that the apostasy has to happen before the day of the Lord.
Amen.
And so that's been the typical understanding, but that is not what the Greek says. And so that's what I came to this understanding of going, well, over here, Daniel 9:27, the first event is the signing of the covenant. The first event of 2 Thessalonians 2:3 is an apostasy. The first event of Revelation 6:2 is the Antichrist riding that begins, and I thought, well, that's interesting. The first event that Jesus describes in Matthew 24 is false Christ, false messiahs. And I thought, wow, if you line those all up, they kind of line very perfectly that the apostasy that is the first event inside the day of the Lord there would be consistent or would coincide with a signing of a covenant. So that's where it led me to, well, how is that? Could that be apostate? Could that be the apostasy is him signing this agreement of the Antichrist, where specifically the Antichrist has them renounce Jesus as the Messiah, which is clearly what 1 John 2 says.
Absolutely. And to me, when you first shared that thought with me, I felt like, okay, now we are putting a foundation under this concept.
Mm-hmm.
My mind went to John 5:43. I am come in my Father's name,
Yes.
and you don't receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive. And what a powerful repudiation this would be if the Jews publicly and renounce Jesus of Nazareth as their Messiah and embrace this Antichrist dude as their Messiah. And then this false Antichrist gives them permission or helps them build their temple. That's according to their Talmudic tradition, isn't it?
It's absolutely, if you ask a rabbi today who's anticipating the coming of the Messiah, they're going to say, well, what's he going to do? They're going to, well, the first thing that he's going to do is he's going to establish Torah. He's going to reestablish Torah, Moses, throughout the land of Israel. That's their whole viewpoint. This is why one of the many reasons why they want to build the temple. So they expect the Messiah, when he comes, to be a part not only of reestablishing Moses, the Torah, which includes the sacrificial system throughout the land. And so, which we know that's part of what's happening because of Daniel 9:27b, the sacrifices stop. But I want to read 1 John chapter 2, because he says here, this is 1 John 2:22, and I like to ask this question. What's the platform? Like, we're in political season. We talk about the Republican platform. We talk about the Democratic platform, whatever. What's the Antichrist platform? Well, we know 1 John 2 tells us, who is the liar? Who is the liar? But he who denies that Jesus is the Messiah. This is the Antichrist. The Antichrist. And so it tells us right there that part of the platform of the Antichrist is specifically, and this agreement that he makes with the Jews is specifically going to be denying that Jesus is the Messiah. So, I don't, it's so crystal clearly when we pull all this stuff together, and glad you brought up John 5:43, because if you line them up, as you said, I like to line things up in parallel, one line and one line. And he says, you didn't receive me. Well, receive him as what? As Messiah. He told the woman at the well in the previous chapter, John 4, I'm the Messiah. And then he says, but you're going to receive that guy. Receive him as what? Well, to be consistent, it would be as Messiah. So and all that's based on, again, that platform of the Antichrist, that specifically Jesus is not the Messiah. So that would be a fresh repudiation of them going backwards and re-embracing Moses.
And what's interesting about going down this path, here the Jews receive a man. They know he's a man. They don't believe he's God manifest in flesh. They reject the God manifest in flesh idea.
Yep.
So they embrace this man who comes as their limited conception of an earthly Messiah. And then he gives them the temple and he gives them opportunity and he's a blessing to them. And then in the middle of the 70th week, he blasphemes them, sits in their temple, and wants to be worshipped as God. What a beatdown.
Absolutely. And this is where I give them credit, because they reject that. They've always rejected, as you just said, a divine Messiah. So that's one of the reasons they rejected Jesus. And so when this guy comes to do it, they're going to reject him as well. They're going to go, no, that's always been a part of our rejection of anybody that claims divinity. They are not the Messiah. And so then, of course, he begins to get upset and he seeks to kill them. And that's why he sets up the abomination of desolation. Jesus says, get out of town. Don't stop. Don't pick up your cloak. Run for your very life, because he's coming after him.
I've often thought about, can you imagine the shame, the humiliation, the embarrassment, the righteous indignation that at least some of those Jews are going to flee when they refuse to compromise and they got to flee for safety.
Yep. And they're going to realize, see, this is the beginning of their enlightenment, because here they are so, right now, they're so enthusiastic for the Messiah. They're so enthusiastic for the temple. So to have somebody come along who not just comes, but he comes with miracles, he comes with supernatural power, he comes with signs and wonders. I mean, that's 2 Thessalonians 2. That is Revelation 13. I mean, that he's going to come supernaturally in the name of God, and he's going to dupe them. So imagine then in the middle, they are sitting there with all of their confusion, going, he's killing us, and they flee. What happened? What did we do? I thought he was the Messiah. He was the Messiah. We got tricked, and they're going to be looking for answers, which in the next 3.5 years they'll end up getting, and it'll be ultimately to Jesus. We know.
Amen. What a blessing. This is going to be national Israel.
National Israel.
In a parallel to our experience as individuals, national Israel going from ignorance and dead religion and dead works to having the light explode on them about the true Messiah.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we want for them. This is what we look forward to. This is why we get excited. We don't get excited about them being deceived or being killed, or many of them being killed during the tribulation, 70th week of Daniel. We're excited for all the promises of God that he's made to Israel will be fully and finally realized in the national people of Israel by the end of the tribulation, and then fully all the way into the millennial period.
Now, this raises an interesting thought, though, because it's not uncommon for those of us in the dispensational circles that love Bible prophecy to get super excited about the building of the temple and see no evil in it. This is all good. This is a great thing. And yet, even though at least some of us understand that there is a level at which it is the temple of God, and God's honoring it, and yet there's another level where things are wrong. Why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, this is interesting because Amir Tsarfati is an example. I mean, he lives in Israel. People know about him. He gets pretty fired up about this, about anybody that seems to get excited about the Third Temple or the Third Temple movement or even the Red Heifers. Of course, I've written a lot about it, the Red Heifers. I have another edition, a new updated edition coming out, here in the next few months. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not excited about the denotative scene here. And what he says is, how come you guys are excited about this? This guy's going to come. He's going to deceive my people. He's going to deceive my brothers. He's going to go to kill them. He's going to point them away from Jesus, the Messiah, the only one that can provide salvation. You guys should not be excited about this. So in the one very narrow angle, he is correct, of course. And when we're talking about being excited, we're not excited about this. We're excited about the end result. And so there's nothing wrong with being excited about what we're seeing happen. But again, what we do know, in being honest, is there is some very difficult times for Jacob. This is why it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. I mean, God calls it that, Jeremiah 30, verse 7. But he will be saved out of it. They will seek him in their distress, Hosea 5:15. They will seek the Messiah in their distress. Daniel 12:7, the angel tells Daniel, God is going to shatter the power of the holy people during that second half of the tribulation. So this is the tightrope that we walk in speaking truth, but also having, like Paul, having a level of sadness for knowing what the Jews are going to have to go through before they come to that place of salvation.
Yeah, comments that you've made on this, that Amir's made on the subject, that um oh, now his name just slipped my mind. Boy, that's not fun. Arnold Fruchtenbaum
Yep.
pointing out that this whole movement to build the temple is at its heart an embracing not merely of the Mosaic law, but an embracing of the Talmudic interpretation of the Mosaic law. And it is a repudiation of the work and person of Jesus Christ. To me, if we're going to have any kind of excitement at all in the prophecy concepts about seeing these things, we also have to enter in to the depravity and darkness that's going into that temple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it right that what you see today, it's interesting within religious Judaism. I mean, there's no doubt that there's Orthodox, there's ultra Orthodox, there's conservative, there's Reform, there's Reconstruction, there's different groups of those that consider themselves to be religious Jews, different levels of commitments. Most of the ones we think about are the rabbinic Jews or the Haredim or the Hasidic or whatever. All those different flavors that you have. A lot of them wear the black hats and the curly hair. Not all of them have to do that, but some of them, they wear the kippah on their head. But no doubt, what you see today is they are Talmudic. They are Mishnaic. These are the ones that follow the tradition of the elders that Jesus talked about in Matthew 15. So the idea, the whole remnant of the Sadducees and any other groups, the Essenes, they're no longer around. The Pharisees were the ones that survived. They're the ones that made a deal with Rome to get an outpost over in Yamnia on the western coast, on the coast of Israel on the western side, about 90 A.D. after A.D. 70. So it was at that moment that they began to solidify their viewpoints, including the oral traditions. So what you see today is this very narrow strip that has now become kind of the big thing of what you see as it relates to religious Judaism. But that wasn't always the case. Again, there were lots of strands, as we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But what we do know as well, let me just say this, that we talked about a little this before we came on, that this apostasy, this rebellion against God, it's going to extend to the whole parts of the world. There's no doubt the Antichrist deceives not just the Jewish people; he deceives the Gentiles as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I want to bring this conversation back to one particular question, and let's elaborate on this for a few minutes. What is this definite apostasy?
Well, you mean in my opinion, in my view?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that we have something to think about and weigh.
Yeah. So in the sense of the word apostasy, I think sometimes what happens is we see this, we get our English language, and so we say, well, and this is where the King James version, their translation, falling away gives you the idea that you were holding on to something or you had a viewpoint about something, you embraced it, and then you fell away from it. So people would say, well, like they have said to me, well, Mondo, the Jews never embraced Jesus, so them falling away from Jesus certainly can't be an apostasy. And I said, well, yeah, but you're interpreting the word apostasy through the English KJV rather than the Greek. The Greek has the idea again of a rebellion. That's why a lot of we've seen that now with more of the latest English translations, because let's remember, originally for the King James, as just an example, I'm not picking on it, it did the best it could. It had 7 manuscripts, but no earlier than the 11th century. Okay, that's what they had at their time. Now, since then, we have 6,000 Greek manuscripts, so we understand the words way broader. We understand, we got the papyri, we got all kinds of other discoveries. So we have a greater understanding of Koine Greek, certainly than they did in 1600. I think everybody would agree with that. So that being the case, let me just give you an illustration of how the Greek word works. I will use English because this is what we speak. For example, if you look at Islam, Islam will call you and I an apostate. Well, I've never embraced Islam. I never fell away from Islam, but they're using it in the right way. They're using it and saying, because you reject this body of belief, you are apostate from it. You reject it. You actively reject it. So in that sense, when we see what the Jews are doing, and we saw earlier in 1 John 2:22, the message of the Antichrist is, if I'm going to do this for you, and you, like you said, John 5:43, if you're going to receive me like you didn't receive Jesus in the first century, part of receiving me is denying that Jesus is the Messiah. This is the Antichrist. I mean, I don't know. It's clearly so that apostasy is saying basically, to heck with Jesus. They're going to give him the bird, just like they have been doing. They're going to, and it's going to be part of the platform. For the most part, the Jews today, the religious Jews today, don't really even concern themselves with Jesus. They just, it's irrelevant to them. But part of that platform, according to 1 John 2:22, is going to be a very specific denial and fresh repudiation.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is when you look at how apostasia was actually used in the Koine era, particularly in the Jewish writings prior to Paul's writing of 2 Thessalonians, and in the Septuagint and the other versions of the Old Testament, like Theodotion and Symmachus. When you look at how apostasia was used in these places, it wasn't used in the sense of a person merely backsliding into sin or falling into sin or someone becoming lukewarm in their Judaism. Again, as to your point, this is kind of like reading into the Greek from our use of falling away and apostasy and backsliding in the English. And that's not what it's talking about. I find it fascinating that apostasia was used, for instance, in the book of Wisdom or the book of Jubilees for siding with Nimrod against the God of the Bible. This was a conscious rejection of the God of the Bible and an conscious embracing of Nimrod and going in an apostate relationship with him. And this didn't imply that you used to be faithful and now you're unfaithful, though that might have been true with some. This is simply a public, emphatic statement that you're rejecting the true God. We also see it used in 1 Maccabees, where Chapter it's 2. Used of Antiochus Epiphanes forcing the Jews to worship the statue of Zeus in the temple. Here again, this is a conscious act that's rejecting the true God and embracing a false God.
You know, let's take it up a notch too, because in that First Maccabees 2 passage, I believe it's verse 15. In that passage, it connects apostasia with sacrifices.
That's right.
And so when this new temple and this allegiance to this Antichrist figure, this repudiation of Jesus, he's going to reinstitute Moses. Every time they offer a sacrifice is going to be a fresh repudiation of the finished work of Jesus, because it's not mixed with faith in Jesus, in that regard at all. We see this in the book of Hebrews, where it talks about under the old covenant, people died on the testimony of two witnesses. How much more then if they trodden underfoot the blood of the Son of God?
That's right.
And that is a serious apostate action, is what the writer is saying there, that if you come in and you offer a sacrifice that is not including, again, understanding and faith in Jesus, it is stepping on and saying the blood of Jesus is worthless. I mean, that's an apostate sacrifice, which is interesting why I find that one time in 1 Maccabees 2, it combines both of those actions together, which is exactly what's going to entail the new covenant that's signed by the Jewish people with the Antichrist in Daniel 9:27. It's going to involve, again, a fresh repudiation of Jesus, and it's going to involve sacrifices that don't consider him at all.
This also takes us to another interesting angle of perspective on this. when we see the return to the temple in the 70th week with the Jews, this isn't going to go back to pick up at the glorious time of the Maccabees. It's
No.
not going to go back and pick up in the time of David and Solomon or anything of that nature. It's going back to pick up under the umbrella of the Pharisees and their Holy Ghost, sin against the Holy Ghost, sin against the Holy Spirit, rejection of Jesus. That's where Israel starts, with the temple in the 70th week.
That's perfectly said, Lee. I mean, people, again, let me just say this. Romans 7:12. The law is holy, good, and righteous. Okay, so we're not against the law in that regard. It served its purpose for sure. But in John chapter 5, that Jesus was. It's like we're living in the modern in biblical times. Jesus is portraying the superiority of himself. The one who honors the Son honors the Father, right? If you don't honor the Son, you don't honor the Father. And so they're going, well, we don't need you. We have Moses. And he says, John 5:42 through 46, all through there. If you really did believe in Moses, if I believed that you really believed in Moses, you would believe in me because he wrote about me. And so you have this battle going on where in their pretense, they were trying to proclaim that they were followers of Moses and they held on to it. But in reality, as Jesus said, and Moses wrote about the coming prophet in Deuteronomy 18, there's, would come a prophet like unto Moses. And it says very clearly, him you shall hear. And that's exactly what did the Father say, at the transfiguration about Jesus? Him you shall hear. You need to hear him. Okay, which is an allusion to Deuteronomy 18. Jesus as the fulfillment of that. So what you just said is so perfect in that what we're seeing is rabbinic Judaism overruled by the traditions, which Jesus had troubles with when they violated the word of God, which many of them did. And he said, you guys are in bondage to your own traditions and you have voided out God's commandment. And so what does he say? That their lips speak well of me, but their hearts are far away. And this is where, again, this re-embracing, this desperate, let's be honest, this is going to be a desperate re-embracing of a worldwide figure, because the Jews have been longing for a long time, over 1900 years, to get their temple back and to reinstitute it. So they're going to be very desperate when a guy shows up with flattery, right? 3 times in Daniel, he comes with flattery. He comes with supernatural power, and he comes with the ability to cause the Mosaic covenant, Daniel 9:27. It says he makes a covenant, or he causes the covenant to prevail, is really what the literal word means. He causes it to prevail in the land of Israel. So they're going to walk right into this trap.
Now, another point that I've been thinking about ever since we've had our first conversation on this nearly a year ago, and it's been some very thought-provoking conversations. When we come to the temple now, you have to bear in mind where the temple is going to be at when the 70th week starts. I'm not talking about the physical location. I'm talking about the spiritual location. We've already had the Holy Spirit leave. The glory is departed, and it was departed for a long time. Then when we come into the Lord Jesus' earthly ministry, at first it was regarded, the Lord would talk about it like my Father's house. But when he comes to the tail end of his earthly ministry, he says, your house is left unto you desolate. And then he rends the veil in the temple. So when we come back to the temple in the 70th week, even if the veil is there, from God's perspective, he's picking up with Israel where he left off. The Shekinah glory's departed. And this is his house, but he's just stepped back from it. And he says, this is your house. You guys aren't going after me with your heart. You're doing things your own way. And your feasts and your offerings and your sacrifices, they're loathsome to me. That's where the Lord's picking up with them in the tribulation. And he's putting up with all this temple nonsense on their part because he has a plan. He has a plan to wean them off of, not only wean them off the Mosaic law, but wean them off their Talmudic, midrashic approach and bring them to Jesus Christ, their Messiah.
It's interesting, Lee, that when I was in college, I had to study rabbinic theology, and so I spent time in the Talmud and other things like that. And I came across this passage, which I thought was extremely interesting, and it goes along with what you just described. That we know in Matthew 27, there was an earthquake, and some teachings will say that this veil that was there, this curtain, was 3 inches thick. Okay, so this curtain was ripped from top to bottom, from God down to humanity, and it was ripped open. Okay, well, what the Talmud describes, and this is so fascinating. So in their own Jewish writings, they don't give the reason necessarily why. They make the comment that there were 40, what it says is 40 years before the temple was destroyed. So roughly, and it's not like exactly, 39 years and 12 months. They're giving a roundabout. Around 40 years before, which would have been right around the time that Jesus was died and was resurrected. It says that what they used to do is they used to put this cord. They would put a red cord. They would tie a red cord on the temple, and which would signify Isaiah 1:18. Though your sins be as scarlet, they will become as white as snow. Right. All the times before that, when they would do their especially on the Day of Atonement, that the red cord would turn white. Okay, so supernatural. But what their writings say is that for the 40 years prior to the destruction of the temple, the red cord stopped turning white. Now, I find that interesting that, they could give some general idea. Maybe the Lord was displeased or here and there, but we know something else had happened during that time. Jesus' death and resurrection and the veil being ripped.
Yeah.
And so isn't that interesting that, and of course, if you read the book of Hebrews, we see all through there that there's been a change of the law. The old covenant is obsolete. It's become annulled. 2 Corinthians 3, it's passing away. We see a whole bunch of other passages that speak about this exact same thing. And yet, so what you just said is so perfect, that moment in time when the red cord stopped turning white, God is going to pick right back up there, and they are going, they're picking up too, right where they left off, with a temple system that is not efficacious. It is not turning the red cord to white, because that is only found through the blood of Jesus, the new and living way into the Holy of Holies.
Yep. And the point that you just made is so critical. God is taken up with them right at the point that he left off with them, which is the rejection of the Messiah. And that will be the issue.
Well, and let's ask this question. The 144,000 witnesses who are Jews, Revelation 7, the 2 witnesses, Revelation 11. What are the 2 witnesses going to be preaching? They're not going to be preaching Moses. They're not going to be preaching the Talmudic law. They're going to be preaching Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. That's what they're going to be preaching. So even from the very beginning, again, the issue is going to be Jesus, all from their fresh repudiation, again, which I think is the apostasy, and their reception of this guy rather than Jesus, all the way to the end, because Jesus said in Matthew 23, what? You're not going to see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And, Hosea 5:15, they in their distress, he says they will earnestly seek him, and he will come when they acknowledge their guilt.
Yes.
And that's going to be the pressure point, is Jesus, Jesus, Jesus from beginning to end, which is exactly the pressure point of when, as you mentioned, when they condemned Jesus, when the chief priests in the Sanhedrin condemned Jesus because he spoke truth. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? You said it.
And what's interesting here is there's a minority school in dispensationalism that treats the dispensations like they're distinct ways of salvation. You were saved by the law in the Old Testament. You're saved by grace now. You go into the tribulation, you're saved by the law again. And I completely reject this. I don't think people have ever been saved by any means other than salvation by grace through faith, according to whatever light and revelation and truth that you have at that time.
100%.
So what's amazing about this is God's whole message is going to be Christ. It's going to be Christ. Can you imagine what it would be like? You're early in the tribulation and you're a priest, you're working in the temple, and you've been secretly listening to the messages
of Lee Brainard on his YouTube
145
channel.
Yeah. Or whether you're listening to Brother Scott Townsend's gospel messages that are on the deep web and hidden from the state, or whether you're listening to some version of TikTok on the deep web and listening to one of the 144,000, and your eyes get opened up and you realize, oh my goodness, we've got a whole layer of Talmudic nonsense here that's obscuring the law. The law was intended not as an end in of itself. It's a schoolmaster to point men to Christ, and we missed it. And then all of a sudden you see the reality of Jesus. You see the temple as a picture of the work of Christ. You see the sacrifice as a picture of the work of Christ. You see everything as a pointing to Jesus. Can you imagine what that's going to be like?
Oh man, I mean this is why we see Zechariah 12:10, right? They will look upon him whom they've pierced, and they will mourn like they just killed their only son on accident. I mean that's the level of enlightenment that is going to happen, but it doesn't happen overnight. There's a process here. Again, the stubbornness, the power, Daniel says it. God is going to shatter the power of the holy people.
That's right.
And holy doesn't mean perfect. It means separated. It means sanctified. It means set apart. These are God's set apart, chosen people. And he's going to shatter their reliance on themselves, their reliance on their Talmudic stuff, and their stubbornness in rejecting their Messiah. But they will get there.
What's exciting to me about this is the passage in Zechariah 13 where we see that 2/3 are going to be perish in the judgments of the tribulation, but 1/3 is going to come through the fire. And I think about that. If we assume there's 12 million Jews when the tribulation starts, 12 million on the earth, and 4 million of them get saved during the tribulation, some at the beginning, some in the middle, some at the end, and then these people are brought nationally into the blessings of the new covenant at the second coming. This will be the greatest revival of any nation in the history of the world. No nation has ever before had 1/3 of their members born again. This is going to be crazy amazing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is what, again, this is what we're looking for. This is exactly what we're after, is thinking about their salvation. This is Romans 11:26. All Israel will be saved. And and the other challenge here, Lee, is, I mean, you look at numbers today, and it's actually a little bit bigger. It's between 15 and 18 million Jews living today. And so you go back to World War II, and there was about 18 million, and 6 million were killed in the Holocaust. That's 1/3. So we're back up at 18 million again. And so if you look at that number, 2/3, that's 12 million killed.
Yep.
And Jesus said in Mark 13:19 that this is the greatest time of trouble, tribulation that's ever existed in the history of creation itself, including the flood. I mean, and this is why, unless the time was shortened to that 7-year period, or even that last 3.5, nobody would be alive. And so this is a horrible time for all people, but especially when you have 2/3 of the Jews cut off, according to that passage. But between 4, whatever the number, doesn't matter ultimately, but between 4 and 6 million end up getting saved, and these are the ones that end up going in again, like we're talking about here, into the millennium to repopulate the kingdom.
I'd like to come back, go back a little bit, right back to the start of the apostasy again. There's a couple things I want to make sure we cover and that everybody really understands enough about what you're presenting so that they can actually weigh this is a legitimate option to consider. One of the ones I want to read Isaiah chapter 28, verse 18. When I saw this verse, it threw a ton of light on me, and I'd read it many, many times. But once I had my eyes focused on a Jewish apostasy as a possibility, then this verse jumped out at me like a bandit at night. Your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the overflowing scourge passes through, then you will be trampled down by it. This seems to imply that Israel, if they're not 100% conscious of their agreement with the Antichrist, that it's an agreement with death or a covenant with death and an agreement with Sheol, they're certainly on moral ground that they could have and should have recognized this. There will be plenty of warning signs.
Yep.
And so what the Lord is implying here is that Israel, from the very get-go when they signed this covenant, from God's eyes, this is a covenant with death. It's an agreement with Sheol. In other words, it's an agreement with hell. And this is going to cost the nation.
And again, if we look at the Antichrist figure, he is Satan's man. He's the dragon's beast, right? And so this is absolutely an agreement with the dragon, and because we know the Antichrist only does what his father tells him, in the dragon in that sense. So we know that this agreement, as it's said very clearly here, there's a scourge coming. What's the scourge? Well, the scourge is the tribulation period. I think when they, as it passes through, it's gonna harm them. And this agreement that they made, in whatever their motive was, whatever the desperation was, it definitely again was a repudiation of the one that gives life, their own very Messiah. And so we know that. What does the dragon want? He wants to take worship away from the true God and onto himself. And this is the way that he dupes them in, no doubt.
Yeah, I've often thought about this, and we mentioned it earlier, but can you imagine the shame that people are going to feel when at the start of the tribulation, they went along with this agreement and covenant, whether they were a signatory or whether they were just observing and their heart was in alignment with this thing. And you're just going along with the platform. You're going along with the program. He's a good guy. He's blessing Israel. He's giving us our temple. He's permitting us to do our Judaism. This will look good on many levels, on a superficial level for Israel. But when he flies his true colors and they realize who he is, that will be a lot of shame.
Yep. I mean, you're going to come to that point of realizing, how could this have happened? Because, I mean, we've been talking about it in the sense that, when you go to talk to somebody and you end up trusting in them and they have all the right words and then they have supernatural miracles, I mean, you're all in. You are all in. I mean, naturally, who can do miracles? Very few people. So only somebody with supernatural connections. And so to see all that, your faith is all the way in, and then to come out and realize that you've been tricked and duped, that your entire foundation is ripped out from underneath. They're going to be reeling. They're going to be reeling in confusion. And then not only that, but at the same moment, they're going to have to be running for their very lives because now this guy's out to kill them. That's a whole nother layer of confusion and just trauma, psychological trauma for putting your entire faith and trust in something that is totally a deception.
Amen. Well, do you have any thoughts or additions that you would like to add to this conversation?
Well, I think this is. I have more. I'll turn the tables on you and kind of interview you a little bit because I would I think when we think about again the three options, the spiritual rebellion of the church, we have the spiritual rebellion of the Jews with the Antichrist, or we have the physical departure. I think for people to understand why, again, Andy, let's all agree with Andy. Andy made a good point here that it referring to the falling away or the spiritual apostasy of the church is very problematic. That has a lot of problems with it. So that we only have two options. The two options we have, in my mind, really are the physical departure, the rapture, or the physical or the spiritual rebellion of the Jews, which again is a singular event. So what I think it would be helpful, Lee, honestly, is just give your chapter titles where you what you discussed to help. You persuaded me, obviously, to remove the physical rapture out. So I think for people to have, they could obviously want them to read the book, but would you mind sharing that at least the chapter titles of what you did, which helped?
Well, what I would like to do is I'll just briefly share what I did in my book, and then I'll share three arguments that I think are very, very heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
What I did when I wrote this book, I read Andy's book, and I was pretty impressed when I first read it. I wasn't convinced, but he made some points that deserve to be made, that deserve to be weighed, and you can't just poo-poo it and push it off and say, nah, I'll just stick with tradition. So what I did is I went and found everything I could find on the subject. I master's theses, articles on the web, stuff that's on Tommy Ice's pre-trib research center website, books published in the last 75 or 80 years that had chapters on the subject. I gathered it all. I read all this, and I gathered every argument that could be made for the rapture interpretation. I collated all this information because in my mind, if you have to deal with this information, you have to weigh it, you have to sift it, and it's either true or it's false. And then I consolidated all this into a series of propositions so that every argument that they made was considered.
Mm-hmm.
Then what I did is one by one, I took every argument that was made and I investigated that as an individual item. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
the argument on the English translations that
Mm-hmm.
every English version prior to the King James Bible gave us the rendering departure. And I investigated that. And what did I discover? It is simply not true. It's not historical fact. Uh, for instance, the first rendering of falling away was not the King James Bible. The first one was 1568 with the Bishop's Bible. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing I discovered is when you go back to Wycliffe's Bible, he's presented as giving departing. But that was a minority reading in the Wycliffe manuscripts. The Wycliffe manuscripts, if you look at the full editions of Wycliffe, the technical editions of Wycliffe, he gave dissension, which means division.
Yes.
So then when I go through all the English Bibles that had the word departing, I discovered two things. One of them that I discovered was that it wasn't the only reading prior to the King James Bible. And the second thing I discovered is these versions in their book introductions, in their chapter introductions, in their footnotes, and in their marginal notes tell us exactly
Cross
what they meant.
references.
Yep. And they said that they meant a departing from the faith. That's what the translators meant. That's what the editors meant. So then I started looking at commentaries from that era. No commentary offered a physical departure understanding of departing. Then I go to the English dictionaries and discover that the word departure in the older English from the 15 and 1600s meant dissension or parting of ways. It didn't have the modern sense very often of a physical departure. So anyway, that was the investigation of the English. I did a very same thing with the Latin. I went all the way back to the Latin Vulgate into the Old Latin prior to the Latin Vulgate. And and demonstrate from the use of the Latin and from comments made by Jerome himself in his letters that he did not mean physical departure in his translation. And then I go through the German translations and demonstrate what the German meant. My conclusion on the translations is there was never a tradition of physical departure in the English Bibles, the Latin Bibles, the German Bibles. That was never a tradition. The concept of physical departure is a modern concept that's read into the Bible as a defense of the pre-trib rapture. So then another area where I went was the early Greek fathers. And this is fascinating. The early Greek fathers fought and divided and disagreed over dozens and dozens of doctrinal issues. But in the early fathers, all the way up through 500 AD, I've read every passage in the early fathers that's extant on the TLG website that covered 2 Thessalonians, chapter 2, the early verses. I read them all, the whole passages, all of them. Not one of those fathers argued for physical departure or argued against physical departure or even offered physical departure as a potential meaning. Now, this, in my mind, is very illuminating. If none of them had even heard of the idea or considered it or regarded it, why would we think it was a legitimate meaning in the Koine era? That was heavy to me. But ultimately, my biggest argument is I looked at every instance of the Greek word apostasia from its first appearance around 250 BC in Archimedes' work, The Sand Reckoner, and went all the way up to 500 AD. This is 750 years of Koine Greek. And I found 283 instances of apostasia that were in the TLG database. And I looked at every one of them in their context, read them in the context, took that snippet of Greek context, found an English translation for it. About 40% of the time, I couldn't find an English translation, and I had to translate it myself. All of those passages in the Greek and the English are in the appendices in my book on apostasia. Nobody has to go back and reinvent the wheel. All the data is there. The Greek, the English translation, and technical footnotes. Now, what's interesting about this is the main body of my book is only about 80 pages of text. There's about 20 pages of technical footnotes, and there's about 200 plus pages of appendices. So all the information is there. And I think that, and I also cover the grammatical arguments. I cover the use of the definite article. I cover the arguments that it has to, the context. I cover all this stuff. So no stone is left unturned. But ultimately, I was forced to conclude that not a single one of the arguments made for the rapture was actually being fair with the entire pile of data. It was all a selective use of the data, and not one of the arguments could stand alone on its own 2 feet.
And this is good because this comes from a guy yourself who loves the pre-trib. You would love to have the evidence there, honestly. I think all of us would love to have it right here to be crystal clear. But all of us, we have to be honest with all the various lines of data and the various lines of argumentation. And so just for the sake of being thorough, when was the first time that you came across where the word apostasia referenced a physical departure?
It was, the date is uncertain, but it was somewhere between the 600s and 700 AD, probably in the 600s. It was in early Marian literature, in other words, early Proto-Catholic literature, and that's where it was found. So that was the first instance of physical departure. I would point out another one. people look at the Liddell and Scott and they look at the second entry where it says departure. And if you follow out the reference, it takes you to a work from the 6th century, which is the 500s. And it is a work on Aristotle's scientific work. When you actually read the context, it's not talking about physical departure of a human being from point A to point B, or even the physical departure of an animal from point A to point B. It's talking about evaporation of liquids from solids when heat is applied. So it's a scientific usage, and it's completely unrelated to the context. And not only is it unrelated to the context, it's probably 4 centuries too late to be regarded as having any value for throwing light on a passage in Paul's epistles.
So this is important, I think, just in normal hermeneutical methods. That, how do we interpret the Bible? How do we go about interpret the Bible? Well, what you don't want to do is to take a usage of a word that is very, very rare, and in this case, extremely late, centuries after Paul wrote the original, and then to import that usage back onto a text because you like the nuance that it brings to the text to help prove something that you might want to be there, which in this case would be the preacher of rapture.
Yes, that's exactly right. Part of the historical grammatical hermeneutic is the concept that every word in the Greek New Testament is used in a common sense in the Koine era. There isn't anything that's not common Koine, and there's nothing from 2, 3, 4 centuries in the future. It has to be from that era, and it can go backwards, but it can't go backwards 5 centuries. It has to be in the common era. Now, words in the Greek New Testament can have an elevated sense, and they often do. So, for instance, the word grace is used in the Bible with the same sense it's used in the secular world, except that in the secular world, it's man-centric grace. In the Bible, it's God-centric grace. In the Bible, that uses faith the same way that it's used in secular Greek, except one difference. In the Bible, it's God-centric, and in the Bible, it's man-centric. So it's really amazing how important it is to find how the words were used in secular Greek, and those are the senses that are legitimate to choose from. And then you find the definition or the usage that fits the context best. You can't invoke a sense or call upon a sense that either didn't exist or won't exist for 4 or 5 centuries.
Yeah. So if we circle back and we take, and this was my journey, and people don't have to follow my journey, that's for sure. But my journey was reading Andy's original article and coming to the conclusion of, I thought, again, his argument against it being a church apostasy was compelling. And then it led him to the physical departure. And then after reading your book, I'm like, well, it can't be physical departure. So that one's checked off. And then Lee checked off the physical departure one. So what's left? And, at this point, there could be other interpretations, but at this point, I think the strongest possibility in my mind is that the apostasy is an apostasy of the Jews in correlation with their reception of the Antichrist, which happens first inside. That's the first event of the tribulation period of the day of the Lord, which, again, I think most of us would agree with. Now, I certainly could be wrong, but I think I would be very curious of what other options we might have.
Well, in my mind, I don't really see any other options. At least I haven't heard any other options offered. In the early church, there was debate whether it was a political departure that involved the fracturing of the Roman Empire before the Antichrist came to power. There was a debate between that political departure and then the religious departure. Once you get past that era, you go forwards the Middle Ages and into the modern ages. The only real sense it was ever looked at was the spiritual departure from one angle or another. And now also it's worthy to point out that in the early church fathers, this passage was regularly covered. It's some of them that covered it were premillennial, and they saw, like Irenaeus, and they saw Israel in the tribulation and the church already gone. Others of them were amillennial, but they believed in a pre-trib rapture, like Ephraim. And so their understanding of the tribulation wasn't exactly like ours, but they did believe in a literal tribulation. And then there were others that had the church in the tribulation, especially later. But all of these treated the grammar in this passage the same. They saw such a close association between the apostasy and the Antichrist, they can't be separated. It's not talking about an apostasy that's distinct from the Antichrist, and you can't talk about the Antichrist without talking about the apostasy. They're joined at the hip, they're inseparable. Where you see the one, you see the other. In fact, some of them were so firm on this that one of the terms for the Antichrist, one of the names for the Antichrist, was the apostasy.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up, because in my research, I came across the same thing where they either called him, that the apostasy is referring to the greatest apostate in the history of humanity, which is the Antichrist, the apostate one. And so they would say that because he so fits the term, therefore Paul is referring to him, which I find interesting, because the next phrase, and what some scholars will do, is it says the day of the Lord will not be present unless the apostasy comes first and the man of sin is revealed. So they'll say, well, the man of sin is revealed in the apostasy, which I thought, well, that fits exactly right, because if you're walking around, and what are we waiting for? I mean, we're waiting to be raptured, but in the sense of that, what there's been a lot of discussion, and you and I have discussed this, Lee, where whenever there seems to be a peace agreement on the table with Israel, everybody's freaking out and saying, this is it. Is this the 7 years? Is this the start of the 7th week of Daniel? When in reality, if you want to know who the man of sin is, in the day of the Lord in the tribulation period, all you got to do is ask, well, who's the guy that made the agreement with the Jews? So, and he's going to be revealed in that apostate action, in the signing of the covenant. We all agree with that the man of sin is revealed in the signing of the covenant. So again, I think Daniel 9:27, 2 Thessalonians 2:3, Revelation 6:2, John 5:43 all line up very, very nicely, speaking of these first events. Proton, this is the first event. The apostasy happens and the man of sin is revealed at the same moment. And that's one of the things that Andy was describing, in a sense, was that for him, the rapture happened and the man of sin was revealed right there. Boom. It was like one happened and the other right next to it. There's a certain level of connection there, certainly of sequence. Some people have tried to put in a period of time there between the apostasy happening first and then the man of sin, but the word then is not in there. It just says, and the man of sin revealed. So if you line them up, it's actually very interesting, which again, the church fathers tended to do this.
Yeah, exactly. They saw such a close connection between them in the grammar.
In the grammar.
They were inseparable. And that's my understanding of the grammar too. I see a construction like this. The Greek is connecting them. It's not separating them. It's not legitimate to say it with the order, for instance, that the apostasy comes first, and like you said, then later on, the Antichrist. That's not how this works. Let me give an illustration that might help people figure this out. Let's say your dad says, okay, boys, the camping trip is not a reality unless the garage gets cleaned first and the grass gets cut. Now, he doesn't really care whether you do the garage first and then cut the grass, or cut the grass first and then clean the garage. What he's saying is these are going to be done before the camping trip is a reality. In a very similar way, we come here and the Lord's saying the apostasy first and the man of sin, but this is not a succession order. And neither is this a conditional thing. If this, then that. What this is simply saying is that if you look around and you see the Antichrist and the apostasy, the first goes with both of them.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Then you're in the day of the Lord, the dawning of the day of the Lord. You're in the tribulation. If you look around and you don't see these two things, then you're not in the tribulation. Now, once you start understanding how this works, we come back to the point you're making about a definite apostasy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say we're looking at extreme wickedness. Let's just say we're looking at deep apostasy in the church, and we're looking at, a return to sodomy in a degree we haven't seen before. Even though from one level we can say, okay, we're going to a place we've never been before, but yet even looking at that kind of stuff, how do you look at something and say, okay, this particular moment, this particular day, even this particular month, this is the apostasy, as opposed to something before or after? You can't really do that. But when you come to the covenant, here's a definite point in time with a definite repudiation of Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah and a definite embracing of the false Messiah as the Messiah. Now you've got a definite point and a definite apostasy at a definite time, and it's definite enough that anyone with their eyes open will recognize that this is the moment. This 1 hour is the moment.
Yep. This is why I think there's people right now that are claiming that we are in the tribulation.
Yeah.
And Paul says, this is the answer. Paul would say, hey, wait a minute, calm down, don't freak out. The day of the Lord isn't here; it's not present, because as I taught you, the apostasy is the first thing that happens, and the man of sin is there. Do you see him around? And we look around. So in the same way, we know that we're not in the tribulation or in the day of the Lord at all, because we don't see we don't see the apostasy happening and the man of sin being revealed again in that same moment. So to me, I look at it in a way similar, using a modern illustration, is that maybe you're freaked out because you're worried that you're missing the basketball game. And I say, wait a minute, the basketball game can't be here unless the referee blows the whistle first and the tip off happens. That's the first event. When you see, have you seen the tip off? Have you seen them blow the whistle? Then you know you're not in the game. The first event that happens that kicks off the whole thing is the whistle being blown and the tip off happening. Boom, boom. So in the same way, the first event that shows that it has already kicked off would be the apostasy happening and the man of sin. So it's not about what happens before the game. It's the first event inside the game. So that's what the Greek is saying there. Robert Thomas wrote a great article, which he's the one that helped me to see it so clearly, which again, this is why in my mind, this is the first event of the day of the Lord. Well, we know the church isn't in the day of the Lord. How could it be a church apostasy? The church isn't even there.
That's exactly right.
So that's another argument against the idea that it's a church apostasy, unless it would be the false professing church that was remaining behind, which was really unusual, because it even leaves the same idea. Who speaks for who? Nobody's speaking for anybody.
That's exactly right. Well, this has been, I think, a very helpful conversation. I think it's going to prove to be helpful to a lot of people who are wrestling with this passage. Can you think of anything that we should probably add before we close this out and move to some Q&A?
No, I think that we laid a great foundation here with all the work that you've done. Again, there's no way that I would even be thinking about this. And honestly, I give Andy Woods credit and I give you credit, because he checked off the one and you checked off the other. So in my mind, I would not even have been thinking through this stuff without the work of you guys, which is great. That's what we should be doing. We lean in on each other.
And what you bring out a very interesting point that we need to bear in mind with some of these doctrinal questions that come up for in-house disputes within dispensationalism. You might find that you disagree with a brother, but quite often when a brother takes a position, he is pointing at information that needs to be considered, and he
Mhm.
might even bring out some very important points that are very critical, even if you disagree with his position.
Absolutely. I mean, again, he rejected one, and then he went to his, and I was like, Andy, we agree on number one. We just don't agree on where he went in number two, because Lee took care of that. So then I'm going to number three. But this is where if I just didn't like what Andy said or just disregarded it, I would have missed out.
Absolutely.
I would have missed out on the research that he did and the very good points that he was making.
Absolutely. He brought a difficult question to the public attention, and to
Mhm.
that he deserves our appreciation.
Yep, absolutely.